This is where you have lookup and reference abilities, where you can pull data from multiple sources. Some very advanced things that can be done here. This is when you start hearing about the classical VLOOKUP that you always hear about. Okay, choose. You have the ability to set a function that if you change a certain cell over here, change it from 1 to 3, then this will take the third item in the list. So it lets you adjust things based on a totally different cell. Offset. You can reference a location and then say, I want to know what's so many cells over and so many cells down from there. So it lets you give other ways of referencing things. Address and indirect, same type of thing. You can say, give me what this cell references, and I'll demonstrate these. They're going to make a lot more sense once I actually demonstrate them. Row and column is a fairly straightforward one. It returns you the number of the row or number of the column. So if you're looking at column A, it'll be 1. Instead of having to refer to it as A, it gives you the numerical value of how many columns over it is. Transpose, another one of the ones that'll be easier once I demonstrate it, but it takes columns and makes them rows, rows and makes them columns. And then VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. And no, that's not hookup, that's HLOOKUP. And that's where you look up things vertically or horizontally. So let's go over and take a look at these. They'll make a lot more sense once we're digging in. So I've got just some data at the top. Goofy, he's a dog, he's from Disney. Mickey, a mouse from Disney. And Elmer Fudd apparently is a human from Warner Brothers.
Really?
Yeah, apparently. So choose. If I say choose the value in A4, and my choices are either B1, B2, or B3. So I have a 1 there, it says Goofy. If I have a 3 there, it'll say Elmer Fudd. If I have a 5 there, it'll say value, because there is no valid value for 5. So just by changing this other cell changes. Offset. Offset says look at position B1, and I want to go 2 cells down and 2 cells over. So 2 cells down, 2 cells over gives me Warner Brothers. If I change this to a 1, it gives me Disney, because only went 1 cell down and 1 cell over. And you can use that to go negative or positive based on whether or not you want to move up or down or left or right. Address, it says, okay, if I'm looking at row 1, column 2, what is the actual address of that if I want to reference it within Excel? And the actual address of that is B1. Now I'm hoping you guys know the dollar signs means if you copy it, that means it remains stable. So if I've got a formula and I've got B1 and I move it somewhere else and paste it in somewhere else, it's going to adjust and say, well, B1 used to be the cell above, so now you must want to look at C5 because I'm now in C6. The dollar sign says always look at B1. If it's $1, it's always look at 1. If it's $B1, then it's always look at B. And it's just one of the ways of making sure the formulas flow properly. Indirect says, okay, I want to know cell C9, which is here B1. This is $B, $1. I want to know what's in the cell that B9 is talking about. So B9 is talking about B1. B1 says Goofy. So it's a roundabout way of getting information from a distant cell. Why would you need that? You can need that if you know that it's going to be the 5th row in and you know where it's going to be, but everything around it might change and you might copy and paste this to somewhere else. So you can use all these things together. It's not something I use very often, but there's a lot of power to them. Especially when you start building the address and indirect work really well together. And when you start building all these together, it can really help you out. Row and column, I described those to you. So row B1, it's in row 1. Column B1, it's the second column. So those are different ways of referencing things that make it more stable. So if you ever need to use them, you've got an idea that they're available. Transpose is probably the most complex function that I'm going to talk about. There's a couple of different ways of accomplishing a transpose. For example, if I wanted to transpose these, the easiest way to do it is to say copy, find your location, paste special, and one of these, it's hard to tell, transpose. So it took it and it transposed it, and now it's Goofy, Dog Disney, Mickey Mouse Disney, and Elmer Fudd Human Warner Brothers. So it took it and it rotated it 90 degrees. That's what transpose does. And if you're dealing with static data, the easiest way to do it is to just copy, paste, transpose. But what if you're not dealing with static data, you're dealing with data that changes, but you still want this other format? That's when you have to start doing the transpose function. What makes it a challenge is if we take a look at the transpose function, and I'm just going to pull up formulas, and where is it here? Trig, lookup. I just want to show you guys what it says in here because it transpose array. This is the first time we've talked about array in this. Array is a computer term that's used in programming to describe a set of data. So this needs to look at, because you're not looking at just one cell, you're looking at a group of cells, you need to talk about the whole array that you're looking at. So the array that I want, one of the things I haven't touched on yet is what this little button does. If I click on this button, what it makes is it takes the entire dialog that I'm looking at and makes it smaller. That's all it does. And the opposite of it's here. It makes it smaller so I can move behind it and select things. You don't have to do that. You can leave it wide open if you want and still select things. So here's the array that I want to adjust. Okay? So I've selected my 3x3 grid. And then I say OK. And I say, well, that doesn't work. What I then need to do is I need to select a 3x3 grid down here. So 3x3. Is that right? Yep. Yeah. And the way you can tell up here, it said 3RX3C. And then I need to hit F2. And then it's called a CSE function. Control, Shift, Enter. And then all of a sudden it turned that into an array and it populated it. And now anything I do up here, if I put a question mark up here by human, because we're not really sure if Elmer's a human, then it populates it with a question mark. So now it's live, while this one, copy paste, it wasn't live, so it still says human. So it's a CSE function, and the help for it is really difficult to understand. I don't use this very often, and when I was trying to get ready for the class and trying to get ready to teach it, it took me about 15 minutes to figure out, reading through the help, to remember how exactly to do this, because the help is really confusing. You have to do it in those steps. You have to build the function, then set the range, hit F2, and then Control Shift Enter.
Well, I think it'll be safe to say if you were having difficulty with it, I will probably not be using it, Shanti.
Well, it's one of those things that until you remember how to do it, but once you know how to do it, it's fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
But it's if you haven't used it in a year, and it's been about a year since I taught the class. So. Next one here is VLOOKUP, and this is one that is very powerful and very useful. What it lets you do is you say, I want to look up what's in cell A4, so A4 is here, and I want to look in the range from A1 to D3, so A1 to D3, this block right here, and I want to find, so let's go into, I want to find column 2, so this is column 1, this is column 2, and if I change that to column 3, then it would say mouse. And this 0, this is one that a lot of people have a little bit of confusion with. If I make that a 1, or if I don't have that in there at all, it assumes the list is in alphabetical order, and it finds either an exact match, or as soon as you start going past that, it says, oh, this is the nearest match in the data, so I'll find it. So it gives you the ability to find where it belongs in the list, as opposed to an exact match. Most of the people that I deal with, they want to use an exact match, so you have to put 0 there. If you don't put 0 there, then VLOOKUP can be quite confusing results.
So when I'm doing a VLOOKUP for some of the things that I've worked on, I should always have a 0 in there?
Yes, if you're looking for exact match, you should have
okay.
a 0. If you've got an alphabetical order and you're not sure, the name might be misspelled and stuff like that, then you might want to do a 1. But the reality is, if you're in that type of situation, you'd probably want to do a bit more of a data cleanup than to start worrying about it pulls in the person above it, and then you got the wrong information going at the wrong person. So, in my opinion, it should default to 0 instead of default to 1, but it's not my choice what it defaults to. HLOOKUP is the exact same concept, but it's rotated 90 degrees. So it's a horizontal lookup. So HLOOKUP is going to look up what's in C14. So C14 is the word dog. In the B1 to D3 area, B1, D3. And it wants a second, 1, 2, so mouse. If I change this, instead of A4, I want it to be, so I can just click on this and I can edit what it's looking at, and it even shows you what it's looking at. It's looking at, oh, I'm doing the wrong one, sorry. Instead of C14, I want to look at because it's, it wanted to, it wasn't editing it. You can drag this to its new location by grabbing the edge, and now it's looking Goofy, and below Goofy is Mickey. So it shows you whatever is below it as opposed to whatever is beside it. And it lets you do those lookups. And it's the same thing with the 0 at the end. One thing I didn't mention with both VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP is for VLOOKUP, the first column has to be the one you're looking in. I couldn't have done this VLOOKUP where it didn't include A1, because even though I don't want the information from A1 is my lookup. So it looks in the first column and says, okay, find me the number 2 in the first column. VLOOKUP, it looks at the top and says, find me the word Goofy on the top. So it has to be that, or you're not going to get the expected result.